Please allow me to introduce myself and explain how it came to be that you are listening to my story. My name is Jim O'Kelly. I am the founder of the new Anti-Vaccination League of America. When I was a boy, I believed that doctors cured people. I believed that vaccines prevented disease. I grew up during the polio epidemics and believed that Jonas Salk had eliminated polio. I believed that drugs cured disease. I believed that doctors were the smartest people in the world and knew everything about disease and restoring health. I believe these things because that is what I was told to believe as a child. I had no reason to doubt these beliefs because I had no experience with serious disease or with doctors. You know, it's a funny thing about many beliefs. They are not supported by many facts. And it's easy to program kids. Kids never have a reason to doubt. Kids have no reason to investigate. They have no desire to do research. They just trust and believe. Most of us go on believing because nothing serious at a medical level ever happens to us. But once in a while, something happens to us or a loved one, and we follow our programmed beliefs. We consult a doctor. Then the advice they give doesn't make sense. The results they promise are not there. So then we question, and we begin to think, and finally we apply our common sense. We wake up and discover that what we believe is not true. Our lives are changed forever. We set out to discover the truth, and we find it. That is what happened to my family, and this is how it affected me. This story is a result of 40 years of searching for the truth about health and disease. Because the smallpox vaccine damaged my daughter, both physically and mentally, when she was only 6 years old, and the allopathic treatment of cortisone injections caused her to be crippled at age 10, and their drugs finally killed her at age 43. And for this I have spent a lifetime of research. My experience has come from dealing with the medical profession on many occasions, with my daughter's lifetime problems that were created by the drug and vaccine business. I will do whatever I can to help people realize that outside of an accident or crisis, the allopathic profession is not only useless, they are dangerous to your health and well-being, as well as your children's. You remember the story of Columbus? Of course. Everyone believed that the world was flat. The smartest and the dumbest. The educated and the uneducated. What do you think that someone back at that time questioning that belief would be called? Well, I will be called the same thing at first, because of my discovery of what a virus really is. At first, you won't believe it, and you'll be shocked. Belief is the most powerful emotion a human being can have. Victories are achieved, inventions have been made, businesses have been built on belief. Henry Ford was taken to court and accused of being an ignorant man. J.C. Penney was called stupid for naming his first store the Golden Rule. Socrates was called a foolish man for not taking the advice to escape the death penalty that was imposed upon him. Everything begins with an idea or a belief. Everything you own was once just an idea founded on belief that it could be accomplished. All successful ideas were powered by belief. Impossible has become the possible with belief. We all know the thoughts of Hitler and how those words create a belief for mass human destruction. Tell a lie long enough and the masses will believe it to be the truth. The belief in America made America the greatest country in the world. If a belief is strong and backed by those in power, it will always be accepted by the majority. The majority of people will accept whatever is fed to them by the controlled media without question. What we believe comes from our parents. Most of what we learn comes from our school books and prejudices of the teachers. As we get older, it is the media who keeps reinforcing these same beliefs. This is the same way our parents and grandparents were taught to believe. But if the media is controlled by those in power and told what to report, you have no idea if you're being told the truth or not. You just believe. If your teachers were misinformed, so will you be. If your government or big business like the medical profession is lying to you in order to gain control, fame, or fortune, how would you know? If your doctor has been miseducated, you will be treated by that miseducation. Did you ever wonder why the majority of people think and believe the same thing? The truth is that the majority of people are wrong about the majority of issues the majority of time. Why do I say that? Because their information all comes from the same source, as did yours. And in this case, your information came from medical people who called themselves virologists. But the difference between belief and facts are as different as night and day. How many of your beliefs have you questioned? How many have you investigated? How many times have you demanded proof? Most people never question, never investigate. They just accept. But who provides information that we accepted as facts? As a child, did you question your parents? Did they question their parents? Those of you like me who have had children who have suffered or died from vaccines just had our children vaccinated. We were told it was a living virus that caused polio, and we never doubted this for a moment. Everyone believed, no one questioned. What a price some of us have paid for our belief and our trust. The same thing applied to the doctors giving those polio shots. They too were victims of belief, only they were deliberately deceived. The doctors were all programmed to believe that Salk's vaccine was safe and prevented polio, but this was a lie, a deliberate, calculated, cold-blooded lie. What you're going to learn will be difficult for you to accept at first. It is this: a virus is not alive and does not cause natural disease. You heard me right. You will learn the definition of the word virus, which changed from its original meaning to a lie based on an experiment that dates back to 1898. You will learn that a virus originally was called a filterable virus and what that means. You will learn that the word virus means poison. You will learn that the virologist uses diseased parts of human, animal, or plants in order to create disease in a laboratory. And you will learn that this branch of biology is called morbid physiology. You're going to learn the greatest medical fraud of all time. But before we get started, I want to tell you how I discovered this information. About 5 years ago, I wanted to put to rest once and for all the lies that Jenner and Salk eliminated smallpox and polio. I knew I could do that. I knew I had enough information to do that. All I had to do was organize it. You see, before I bought a computer, my sources were all books. These were books written by doctors and healthologists who were actually living during the times these diseases were common. And as I was doing research, scientific names started popping up. I looked them up and read their actual reports and experiments. This went on for several years. I couldn't really believe what I was reading. I read them over and over again. I know how to read. My comprehension is good. But this was incredible. I had a difficult time believing that I was the only person who had uncovered these people that I call Frankenstein doctors. Who were these morbid people? They call themselves virologists. I have learned that the branch of biology these sick people experiment with is called morbid physiology, the study of the dead as opposed to the study of the living. You know, in the Dark Ages, they said the world was flat. Today in the educated world, it is said a virus is alive and causes natural disease in man. They found out that the world was not flat, and you will find out that a virus is not alive and does not cause natural disease. Columbus traveled the way of the water to discover the truth. I too have went on a long trip to discover the truth. A trip back through time to the late 1800s, up to the 1920s, where the lies began to be planted in the minds of the medical profession. This deception, those lies, have led to the injecting of 35 poisons in our children today by the time they enter school. It is time to sink this vaccination boat. You see, I no longer believe because I have found out the truth. The truth has set me free from the medical lies that are the foundation of today's so-called modern science. This is the story of the beginning of a massive lie. The lie being a so-called living virus. This birth of a living virus is based on the works of two major scientists. The first scientist who believed in Frankenstein's science and thought that the dead came alive. And the second scientist exploited the ignorance of the first. I'm going to give you their names and quote a few conclusions of their experiments, and then give you the name of their reports for you to look up and verify yourself. With this information, you'll discover in a short time what took me a lifetime to discover: the greatest medical fraud ever perpetrated. This fraud is a story about dead matter, waste, and poison, and pus being eliminated from the body that became promoted and accepted as a living agent and the cause of disease. It actually goes back to the late 1800s. Martinez Beijerinck, a microbiologist, wanted to discover the cause of a disease of some tobacco leaves. The main symptoms of this so-called disease were the changes in color of the leaves from a dark and light green, spots that later turned yellow on the leaf. This condition actually turned out to be caused by soil depletion and toxemia. It turned out not to be a contagious disease as Beijerinck thought. In fact, Beijerinck himself said, I quote, "The young tobacco plants have become diseased through artificial infection with much virus," close quote. You know, several experiments were made to prove the actual cause of the spot disease of tobacco leaves. This was during the same time that Louis Pasteur was claiming that bacteria was the cause of people getting sick. So in 1898, Martinez Beijerinck conducted 2 experiments on the spotted leaves. His purpose was to find the bacteria that he thought might be the cause of the spotted tobacco leaves, which he erroneously believed was a disease. In his first experiment, he took some spotted leaves and ground them up to a sap. He poured the sap into a porcelain filter with tiny holes. If there was any bacteria in the sap, the filter would hold them back. This would be proof, in his mind, that bacteria was the cause. To his surprise, no bacteria. He did, in fact, prove that bacteria was not the cause of the spots on the leaves. This should have been the end of it. But he makes another experiment which defies common sense. He injects the ground up sap into the veins of a healthy young plant. This sap he gave the name filterable virus, which meant filtered poison in his time. Some of these plants became discolored and spotted. Beijerinck says, and I quote, "The young tobacco plants have become diseased through artificial infection with much virus," end quote. Nowhere in his experiments did Beijerinck indicate that any plants caught this condition. He was transmitting poison to a healthy plant, thereby creating a disease condition. In his own words on page 34, we read, I quote, "The infection is not caused by bacteria, but by contagium vivum fluidum." That tongue twister is Latin for living fluid. That, of course, is a fact. The living fluid, or sap, did cause the condition. Who would deny that? But in order for the plant to be infected, it had to be injected. The original plant with the natural disease was not injected in order to get infected. I'm getting to be a poet here. So we have two different causes for the same disease. One is natural, one is artificial, and was deliberately created by Bejernek. So we now know that Bejernek caused the condition of the spotted leaves by injecting sap virus into the healthy young plants. Now we will discover the cause of the natural condition of the spotted leaves. There was another microbiologist doing the same exact experiments and getting the same exact results. His name was Dmitry Ivanowski. The difference was Ivanowski went out and interviewed the farmers who actually grew the plants. And he concluded that the disease of the tobacco plants was caused because the plants were grown in a small area, just about a few square yards, for long periods of time. In fact, as far as long as 40 years. See, Ivanowski realized that the farmers were just ignorant about soil depletion. So he advised them to space their crops further apart and to rotate the plants. Ivanowski concluded a soluble toxin might be capable of provoking the appearance of the disease. He also proves that the disease was contracted during the vegetative growth. Modern science will prove that Ivanowski was correct about the cause of the spotted leaf disease and Bejernek was wrong. So let's get back to Bejernek and see how poison became a living agent. Here is his conclusion as to the cause of the disease he created by injecting plant sap virus into other plants. On page 35 of his paper, Bejernek says, quote, "If these parts are extracted, an infinite number of healthy plants may be inoculated and infected from the sap, from which I draw the conclusion that the contagion, although fluid, reproduces itself in the living plants." Close quote. The tobacco leaf experiment is the virus model used today that miseducated the entire medical profession about the cause of natural disease. And on page 38, Bejernek says, quote, "Only those organs of the plant that are growing and whose cells are dividing are capable of being infected. Here only does the virus reproduce itself." End of quote. Again, this is the model for what they teach today for virus and natural disease. However, even Bejernek had difficulty believing this nonsense. Now, in the book titled "Viruses, the Smallest Enemy," David Locke, a professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, quotes Bejernek. And on page 20 of that book, Bejernek is quoted as saying, "It seems to me that the reproduction or growth of a dissolved particle is not absolutely unthinkable, but it is very hard to accept. And the idea of a self-supporting molecule seems to me obscure, if not positively unnatural." End quote. Bejernek called his sap a virus because he knew that the word meant poison. The question is, how did the word virus, which meant poison, get promoted and accepted as a living agent that caused natural human disease? I will give you the man and the proof of who made this change to deceive the entire medical profession. But first, let's lay this virus as a living agent that causes natural disease to rest once and for all, because it simply just is not true. For proof, we move up into the modern world of science. From the book, The Life of a Virus, written in the year 2002 by Angela Krieger, who was an associate professor in the Department of History at Princeton University. On page 32, Professor Krieger says, a scientist by the name of A.F. Woods of the United States Department of Agriculture challenged the infectious etiology of tobacco leaf disease, contending that Bajornack's contagious fluid consisted of accumulated oxidase and peroxidase, which cause mottling of the leaves by enzymatically destroying chlorophyll. I'm not sure if I pronounced those chemicals right because I didn't take chemistry. But it doesn't really matter. He's telling you that this poison interfered with the lifeblood of that plant, which is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll to a leaf is like blood to a human. If you inject poison into a plant, an animal, or a man, you will create a disease, a malfunction of the system, or possibly even death. That's common sense. Professor Krieger then follows up. In 1905, a man named F.W. Hunger accounted for mosaic disease through a toxic ferment produced through poor growth conditions and nutrition, close quote. And there you have it. Ivanowski was right. The so-called natural disease of the plant was a result of mineral deficiency or soil depletion. And Bajornack's man-made disease was caused by toxins, which meant the word virus, which meant poison. Professor Krieger says then on page 2, quote, tobacco mosaic disease, or as they call it, TMV, became the model object, not only for other viruses, but for life itself. Heavy stuff. A classic case of Frankenstein science, bringing the dead to life. This so-called virus became the model for the great Salk vaccine fiasco in the 1950s. Page 5, Professor Krieger says, tobacco mosaic disease research led the way in structural studies of polioviruses. On page 332, Professor Krieger says, the story of the tobacco leaf disease was the beginning of the virus discovery. And then she asked herself, or she asked a question. How could particles of disease separated in a centrifuge machine be alive? Great question. How could particles of a disease separated in a centrifuge machine come alive? Common sense should be screaming at the top of its lungs that dead particles don't come alive. So if a virus is not a living agent that causes disease, then what is it? The answer will change your life forever about the way you think of the natural disease. Here is the proof of the definition of what the word virus really means. The Universal Historical Dictionary of 1951 says this: virus, poison, a poisonous substance produced in the body as a result of some disease. An example of this would be the disease of smallpox. Virus, poison, pus, being eliminated by the body is the result of the disease, not the cause of the disease. The pus did not cause itself. The pus was the result of the disease. This may be the first time you have heard this, so I'm going to reference it again with Webster's Encyclopedic Dictionary of the English Language, 1955. Virus, venom, a poison produced in the body by a disease. You need to study and reread that until it makes perfect sense to you. Think of a tumor. Something caused the tumor. The tumor did not cause itself. The medical profession has cause and effect ass backwards. That's why they don't get anywhere. So how did the word virus, which meant poison, become accepted as a living agent that caused natural disease? Started back in the early 1900s. A man named Simon Flexner was the first director of the Rockefeller drug empire. His specialty was in snake venom. Snake venom was one of the definitions of virus poison. Flexner took Bajornick's experiment to the human level. Flexner cut out the spinal cord of a 9-year-old boy who died, ground it up into a liquid, and injected the liquid into the brain of a monkey. The monkey lost control of its muscles. Flexner is credited with transmitting infantile paralysis. Again, the monkey did not catch a disease. The disease or condition of muscle loss was clearly transmitted by injection. Make sure you understand that. Now, Thomas Rivers worked for Flexner. He learned his experiments and later took Flexner's place as director of the Rockefeller Empire. Rivers then began promoting Bajornick's experiments as undisputed facts. In his 1927 report, titled Filterable Viruses, A Critical Review, Rivers says on page 217 in talking to a group of doctors, quote, "We are here today for the purpose of taking thought concerning the knowledge of the so-called filterable viruses and the diseases caused by them." What was the definition of a filterable virus? Infectious agents that pass through bacteria retaining filters. Rivers knew this. So keep in mind that the only diseases caused by filtered virus poison were the ones that Bajornick and Flexner caused or created artificially by transmission. Rivers goes on to say, quote, "Throughout this discussion, the term filterable viruses will be employed to designate certain transmissible agents which are capable of producing disease." Rivers says these filterable viruses are the cause of smallpox, chickenpox, measles, and polio. Again, here is the scientific definition of the term filterable viruses as provided in Professor Krieger's book, The Life of a Virus. Quote, "Infectious agents that pass through bacteria-retaining filters." End of quote. There you have it, folks. A perfect con game. Rivers just said that natural disease was caused by unnatural experiments. Filterable viruses, which he knew came only from ground-up plants and animals. And on page 228, Rivers says, quote, "In view of the fact that viruses multiply only in the presence of living cells," end of quote. Rivers knew that. That exactly is what Bajornick concluded about the filtered sap injected into other plants. You see, Rivers' goal was to deceive the entire medical profession as to the cause of natural disease by taking artificially created disease and proclaiming that the artificial cause was the same as a natural cause. And he succeeded with flying colors. Give the man an A+. Now, why is any of this important? And what does it mean to you? Well, it's important because Rivers was one of the main characters of the Great Salk Vaccine polio scam of the 1950s. He pulled it off. Rivers joined the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis, which was later the March of Dimes, in 1938. And he was appointed the head of the virus research program. Rivers controlled everyone, everything, and all the money given out to virologists who were working with the so-called polio virus. Nothing happened without Rivers' stamp of approval. The belief that polio was eliminated in the 1950s is the reason we are vaccinating our kids today. When enough people like yourself discover that a virus is not the cause of polio or any other disease, the vaccine con game is over forever. Now, there's a lot more to this. And on my next CD audios, I'm going to give you the answers to the following questions that I know you have. How a virus is isolated, how a virus mutates, how a virus grows, how do you determine virus activity in a cell, how does the virus multiply, how is the virus attenuated, how does the virus reproduce, herd immunity, antibodies, virus shedding, and more. As I have uncovered a lie of the living virus causing disease, I have uncovered the lies of those aforementioned subjects. Now I have given you almost 40 years of research in almost 40 minutes. It's really a lot more to this. These are the references. I want you to check them out yourself. I'm going to say them slow, have a pencil and paper ready, and read the whole reports yourself, and you will know the truth as I know the truth. The first one is by Martinez Beijernick, Beijerninck. The title of his report is Concerning a Contagium, spelled Contagium, V like in victory, IVUM, FLUIDUM, as a cause of the spot disease of tobacco leaves. The next report will be by Dmitry Ivanovsky, IVANOVSKI, 1864 to 1920, by a man named Hubert, Hubert, capital LE, capital C, HEVALIER. Then you want to look up Simon Flexner, MD, December 3rd, 1924. Contributions to the pathology of experimental virus encephalitis. Then you want to look up our bad guy, Filterable Viruses, a Critical Review, Thomas Rivers, January 31, 1927. The one that reference that I had, Voices, or Viruses rather, the Smallest Enemy, was a book by David Locke, 1974. And then we have Professor Angela Krieger, Krieger, who wrote the book in 2002, The Life of a Virus, so that's certainly available. For more information, you can contact me at jimokelly@yahoo.com. That's JIMOKELLY@yahoo.com. So until we meet again, have yourself a great day and make sure it's vaccine and drug-free.